there, and happy May. It's Jennifer Brett, Program Assistant of the Pendleton County Extension Office. And we're continuing with our safety videos. So last month we talked about bicycle safety, which was a good thing since so many kids are now out and about on their bicycles because the weather is getting warmer. And this month we're going to talk about ATV safety. Again, the weather is nice and warm, school's about to get out, so more kids will be out on ATVs. Now, while ATVs can be fun to ride, they can be dangerous. So there are a few things that we need to know. I'm going to start off with a report from the Kentucky Youth Advocates. And this report's from 2005, so it's a little bit dated, but it has some good information in it. And then we'll get into some 4-H material, and then we'll talk about some Kentucky state laws. So here we go. So the 2005 report from the Kentucky Youth Advocates states that over the past 2 decades, and this would have been 1985 to 2005, 105 children under the age of 18 in Kentucky died from ATV crashes, and many thousands more sustained injuries. And think about how 16 years ago is when this was written, and I think a lot more folks are riding ATVs now than they were 16 years ago. So what makes ATVs so dangerous for children? The biggest issue is that they are riding adult-sized ATVs with adult-sized engines. So many children under 16 use ATVs that are more powerful than are recommended for their age group. In 2001, 87% of ATV-related injuries suffered by children under 16 were caused by adult-sized ATVs. The standard industry recommendation on engine size is that youth under 12 should not drive ATVs with an engine size of 70 cc's or greater, and that youth under 16 should have an engine size of 90 cc's or less, which is also the Kentucky state law. The average size engine of ATVs driven by children in Kentucky is 240 cc's. So if we do a little bit of math on that, for under 12, that is more than 3 times the engine power than Kentucky law states. And for those under 16, it's more than double. So that is one reason why there are so many ATV accidents. So ATVs really need to be sized to the child that is riding them. Another thing that causes injuries and death in children is limited helmet use. So head injuries can be greatly reduced with proper use of helmets, but they are not widely used by ATV riders. It is estimated that 50% of head injuries from ATV use could be prevented with helmet use. Kentucky law requires helmet use on public land, however, it's not required on private land. And then the other thing that affects some accidents with ATV use is a lack of training. So few people, even children, receive training on how to drive an ATV. They mostly learn from a friend, maybe a relative, or they teach themselves. Would you let them take a car and go drive around the field on their own? Or would you give them a few pointers first and show them a few things? And be with them, at least, okay? So same with ATVs. It is a motorized vehicle, so it is going to be more dangerous than things that are non-motorized. And another big thing is supervision. So under the age of 16, children should be supervised when riding an ATV. Most are not, as we know. So it's not like you have to have your eye on them every second, but if you're at least outside and you can hear where they are, because if they get into an accident, you can hear that if you're outside and paying attention, and you can get to them much quicker than if you're inside watching a movie and they're outside on their ATV, and it might be a couple hours that they're laying there and you don't know it. So I'm not trying to get gloomy on you here, just try to point out a few facts and to keep our kids a little bit safer. This poster comes to us from the UK Extension 4-H ATV Safety Booklet. So this is how to fit your ATV to your body size. So step 1, you want to check the clearance between your ATV seat and your inseam while standing on the foot pegs. So the inseam is from the crotch of your pants down to the bottom of your pants. So when you're standing on your foot pegs, you need at least 3 to 6 inches above the seat. If when you stand up, you are only an inch or two above the seat, this ATV is much too large for you. Step 2, check the following while seated. First, your grip reach. Your elbows should have a distinct angle between your upper arm and forearm. So let's look at the picture here where the number 1 is. If your elbows are straight out, you won't be able to turn the handlebars. If your elbows are at less than right angles or 90-degree angles, you are too large for the ATV. So that means you need to be somewhere between a 90-degree angle, which is a nice L shape with your arm, and straight out. So you want a slight bend to your elbows when you are holding on to the handlebars. The throttle reach. With your right hand in the normal operating position, check to see if your thumb can easily operate the throttle. So if your arms are straight out, it might be kind of hard to be pushing on that throttle with your right hand. But if your arms are slightly bent, you should have plenty of grip strength on that handlebar to be able to push that throttle. The brake reach. So that will be with your left hand. Check to see if the first joint from the tip of your middle finger in extends beyond the brake lever. If not, your hand is too small to grip the lever effectively in an emergency. Make sure your thumb can also reach the engine stop switch. So squeeze the brake lever a few times to be sure that you can comfortably operate the controls. Again, if your arms are straight out, you're not going to be able to reach to that brake to be able to pull on it tightly enough to help you out. So that needs to be a nice, easy motion. So next is the upper legs. The upper portion of your leg, roughly from the top of your knee to your hip, should be about horizontal. Again, take a look at the picture. You don't want your knees up higher than your hips, and you don't want them way down below. Again, if it's way down, then you are much too small for that ATV. If your knees are way up, then you're much too big for that ATV. And then lastly, the foot length. Your toe should be able to depress the brake with a simple downward rotation of your foot. You should be able to use the brakes and the gear shift consistently without hesitation. That will make it safer as you're driving your ATV. So go through this with your ATV and make sure that your body is fit to your ATV. Again, we're going to reiterate the engine size because that is a Kentucky state law. So we need to be paying attention to those things to be keeping our children safe on ATVs. So next, we are going to talk about some parts of an ATV. All right, so how many were you able to answer from that first graphic? Do you know where the parts of your ATV are? So let's go over the answers quick. And first we're going to look at the full picture of the ATV, and that has a number 3 and a number 9 on it. That would be on your right foot side. So number 3 is your foot brake pedal. Make sure you can reach that when you fit your ATV to your body. And number 9 is your starter, which is if it's a pull, kick, or electric starter, that would be located down there. There is also an ignition switch at number 5, which is on the left-hand side over here. Sometimes though, if the key doesn't start, you can pull start it or use that other one that's down by your foot. So now let's look at the little box above the front of the ATV here, and that's going to be where your left hand is. So number 1 is your parking brake. Sometimes it's a little hard to get that on. Sometimes you have to finagle it a little bit. Number 2 is your hand brake, and there's one of those on the left hand and one of those on the right hand. So you'll see that in both of those boxes. Number 7 is your engine stop switch. That is important to know where it is in case you get into trouble and the brake's not working. Sometimes you can just kill the engine. Number 4 on your right hand side is what you would use with your thumb. That is your throttle switch to give yourself gas to get that ATV moving. All right, number 5 is your ignition switch. This is down on the main body of your ATV in front of where you are sitting, and that's where your key would be to turn your ATV on. Number 6 is your choke or primer, especially if it's cold out. You may need to choke it first. Sometimes when it's warm out, you don't need to do so. Depends on your ATV. And then number 8 is your gas cap or tank vent. And that's important to know where it is. Make sure that you don't run out of gas. Make sure you're fueled up before you head out on a ride. So those are our parts to our ATV. Hope you got some right. Up next, we are going to talk about our safety gear. Again, there's going to be a thing up on the screen for our ATV attire. In Kentucky, as I said, a helmet is required if you are on public lands. However, unfortunately, it is not required on private lands. But I do recommend that you always wear a helmet riding an ATV, especially if you're under the age of 16. So if you're on public lands, there is a approved helmet necessity. You can't just be wearing a bicycle helmet. So that is the link for that is on the screen. That is actually the federal regulation that Kentucky follows as well. You should also have long pants and long sleeves on, because if you're riding an ATV, typically you're going through brush or maybe through the woods, and you don't want all those branches and things slapping against you and causing injuries. Boots or closed-toed shoes are also very important. If you don't have boots, as long as you're wearing something like a tennis shoe, and make sure that they're tied, but do not ever wear flip-flops or open-toed shoes on an ATV because your foot can slip much more easily. That can cause an accident, and you could get injured on your legs much easier as well. Gloves are always recommended, not required, but recommended. That's going to help keep your hands from getting as bruised up while you're riding your ATV. But then one other thing that is recommended or required in Kentucky, is eye protection, such as goggles. So just like you need to have a helmet, these helmets are not like motorcycle helmets. They don't have a piece of protective eyewear. So therefore you need to have some goggles on. If you do have something that has that protective glass already, that's okay. All right, so now we are on to checking and starting our ATV. So again, another graphic. So to check our ATV, we're going to check the tires, the controls and cables, the lights and electronics, the oil and fuel, and the chain and drive shaft. So that is something that you should do every time that you go to ride your ATV. Kind of like a pilot has a checklist, and they're not allowed to get into that plane and start that engine until all of those things are checked off. Same thing when you're riding your ATV. Again, this is a motorized vehicle. Lots of things could go wrong. So the more you check it, the more you're paying attention, the less likely you are to have an equipment malfunction that will cause an accident. We also have starting your ATV, and then we're also going to talk about mounting and dismounting from your ATV. So for starting your ATV, we've got our brakes. So set the parking brake, turn the ignition on, transmission needs to be in neutral, check engine stop switch, and then check the choke position. So depending on your ATV, whether it's an electric start or a pull start, that will make things a little bit different. So that's something you'll need to be trained on your own ATV. But in general, these things on the screen are what you need to be paying attention to. For mounting and dismounting, typically we want to get onto our ATV from the left-hand side, just like you would mount a horse. Or get into a vehicle. You always, here in America, we get in on the left, right? So that is something that you want to do, get on from the left, unless your ATV is in a position, like say you had to stop on a hill and you're kind of leaning, then you might want to get on from the right so that you don't tip it over. So keep those things in mind when you're mounting and dismounting your ATV. But you want to do it from the left, typically. You want to make sure that your brake is on, and you want to make sure you're in a good position before you start that engine up. So now on to the Kentucky laws. Kentucky does not have many ATV laws. The biggest one being that if you're under 16, you have to have a helmet on if you're on public land. The other big one is that ATVs are not allowed on roadways at all, unless you are crossing the roadway. That's the only time that you're allowed. And if you're crossing a roadway, that's public land, you have to have a helmet on. So if you're riding in the farm field and you have another farm field across the road, you need to be having a helmet on because you're crossing that road. Now, adults can get away with this a little bit more, because if it's in an agricultural practice or a logging practice or something that is a commercial entity, meaning they're doing it for a business, then they don't have to have a helmet on. So in the Kentucky laws, and that link will be up on the screen at the end of this presentation, it talks about noise. You're not allowed to modify your muffler. You have to be cognizant of noise pollution and others around you. But other than that, pretty much just you can only cross the road, you can't drive along a road, and under 16 you have to have a helmet on. The only time that you wouldn't is if you're a farmer and doing agricultural work or logging, such as that. Titling and registration of ATVs, Kentucky does not require registration of your ATV. I do recommend that you title it, and there is there'll be a link for that up as well. And that has more to do with your protection. If someone were to steal your ATV, you could prove, if you have a title to your ATV, that that was yours to begin with. If you don't ever title it, then you might not be able to prove to anyone that that was yours, and they might not be able to recover it for you. So, as I said, registration is not required in this state, but titling is recommended. Back to the laws. If you are over the age of 16 and you are riding, even if you're a farmer riding along the road, then you have to have a motor vehicle operator's license. So just because you're in the farm entity, you still have to have a license, and not if you're on the roadway. So if you plan on riding out of state somewhere, because ATVs might be fun to put on a trailer and haul somewhere else and see something different, make sure that you find out the laws where you are going, because you as the rider are responsible for knowing those laws. And just by saying, oh, I'm from somewhere else, I don't know, that doesn't mean you don't have to follow their laws. It's your responsibility to find out ahead of time. Otherwise, you might come home with a hefty ticket that you have to pay. So, biggest things to remember: have the correct gear on so that you're not getting injured because of that. Make sure your engine size is correct, and make sure you are following the few laws that Kentucky has. So, don't mean to be a Debbie Downer here. So I do want you to enjoy riding your ATVs. I just want you to do it safely and not get injured. So thank you very much for joining us this month. Up next month will be boating safety. So enjoy vacation.